Good afternoon, and welcome to the Work Zone Safety Information Clearinghouse webinar on temporary traffic control, the final rule issued by the Federal Highway Administration in December 2007 on Subpart K. My name is Brad Sant, the manager of the Work Zone Safety Information Clearinghouse, and today we are honored to have Mr. Chung Ng, the Transportation Specialist with the Federal Highway Administration, to present our seminar. Chung graduated from George Washington University with a Bachelor of Civil Engineering in 1982. Since joining the Federal Highway Administration, he's held various positions including Area Engineer with the Illinois Division Office, Program Manager with the Construction and Maintenance Division at FHWA Headquarters, Transportation Specialist with the Office of Traffic Management and ITS Applications, Transportation Specialist in the Office of Transportation Management, and currently as the Work Zone and Safety Team Leader with the Office of Transportation Operations. Chung will be talking to us about the new rule and implementation of that rule. Due to high demand for this webinar, it will be available on demand through the Work Zone Clearinghouse at www.workzonesafety.org after 3 o'clock p.m. today. So if you're aware of folks who have not been able to join us live, it will be available on demand. So without further ado, we welcome Mr. Chung Ng.
Thank you, Brad, for that introduction. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. As Brad indicated, I'm going to be going over some of the highlights and details of this new Subpart K that we just issued not long ago. I'll start by going over the agenda real quick, just to touch on the key things that I'll be addressing part of this seminar today. I'll start by going over some of the whys, of why we developed this rule. Also provide an overview of the new rule, including identifying the key shalls and some of the shoulds that are should be of particular interest that's included in this rule. Then I'll segue to a summary of what those requirements are, including a discussion of what we expect to see as part of as a result of the rule being in place. Also touch on some of the resources that will be available to help with the implementation of this new rule. Okay. With that, I'm going to get into just to start us off, touching on the whys of why we're doing this. What you see on the screen as far as our highway infrastructure is aging, and the need for rehab work and reconstruction work is growing. That shouldn't be news to anyone. We just recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of the interstate highway system. So yes, our system is getting older, and the need to address, I guess, the system being worn out over all those years with more rehabilitation work and more reconstruction work is growing. And much of this work is occurring while traffic is actually maintained on on the various systems where work is occurring. To give you a sense of what this means, I've kind of put together a few figures relating to the exposure. If you see, approximately 20% of the national highway system is under construction during the peak construction season each year. And more than 3,000 work zones are expected to be present on the system during that peak. Approximately 12 billion vehicle miles of travel a year will be through active work zones. So that's quite a bit. And as a driver, you can probably expect to see a work zone, be driving through a work zone, 1 out of every 100 miles that you drive on the national highway system. Okay. In terms of safety, looking at some of the figures from over the last 10 years, we've seen an increase of 45% up to the current figure of 1,010 fatalities in work zones in 2006. Okay. More than 40,000 people were injured each year as a result of crashes in work zones. And that translates to 1 fatality every 8.7 hours. It's almost 3 a day. When you think about it, that's a sobering figure. And 1 work zone injury every 9 minutes, 160 a day. And the need for rehabilitation and reconstruction is not really going to go away. In fact, it will probably get worse as our system continues to age, and there's more and more traffic that actually adds to the wear and tear that's on it. So, what must we do? I guess we need to address this. I guess we need to look at how we can design our work zones better so that they work better. And to support this, we've published a couple of rules. Okay. The first one, Work Zone Safety and Mobility Rule, I guess often referred to as Subpart J, everyone should be familiar with. That was published in September 2004. It became effective last October. Okay. That really provided or established a framework for systematic consideration and management of work zone impacts, both safety and mobility impacts, throughout project delivery process. Okay. And currently, just to give you an update of where we are on that, 48 states have fully met the initial compliance requirements for this rule. Okay. And that means they have an approved work zone policy, that they have established a definition for significant projects, that they've established procedures for developing transportation management plans, that they also established a training plan, to get all the key people appropriately trained depending on their specific function. Okay. The other 4 states are partially in compliance right now, but they're working on a draft that, once finalized here in the near future, will put them in compliance as well. Okay. Now, the second rule, the rule of the subject, that's the subject of today's webinar, is the Temporary Traffic Control Devices Rule, which we refer to as Subpart K. Okay. That was published December 5th, 2007, and becomes effective December 4th of this year. So for those who are impacted by this and have not started really looking at what needs to be done, suggest that you begin doing so. Okay. And basically, this rule is developed as a supplement to Subpart J. Okay. So, and it adds some additional safety considerations that should be integrated into the policy and procedures that were developed under Subpart J. I'll get into a little bit more detail as we get into this. Okay. Now, in developing Subpart K, we were also guided by language that was contained in Safety Law, Section 1110. Okay. What you see on the slide are some specific requirements from that language in Safety Law, which mandates rulemaking to establish conditions for appropriate use of and expenditure of funds for what you see there, the 3 items: positive protective measures between workers and traffic, uniformed law enforcement officers, installation and maintenance of temporary traffic control devices. The language also mandated that separate pay items in contracts be included to ensure that projects address the cost for the safety measures when the measures are necessary. Okay. So clearly, looking at the language, the focus of this is to improve safety in work zones. Okay. Specifically, the specifics are outlined, and when we develop the rule, we really use that as to build off in terms of ultimately including what we did in the rule. In doing so, we also kind of looked at the definitions that were provided in that language. One of them was the positive protective measures. A direct quote from the language in 1110 is that temporary traffic barriers, crash cushions, and other strategies to avoid traffic accidents in work zones, including full road closures. In the initial draft of the rule that we submitted as part of the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, there's some confusion that the definition created because it was so broad. So for clarity, and in finalizing this, refining this rule into its final form, we actually broke out that definition into several items. One being positive protection devices, and then we also had another item as exposure control measures and other traffic control measures. And I'll get into a little bit more detail of each one of those in the next several slides. Okay. This is just repeat some of the information to some degree that I've mentioned, but I thought it would be good to kind of provide a little bit of a snapshot, a little overview again of some of the key factors relating to this rule. The goal, of course, is to decrease work zone fatalities and injuries to workers and road users, and this is consistent with the work zone safety focus in Safety Lu. And the approach, as I mentioned, was that we are building on the processes and procedures guidance that were implemented under Subpart J. When Safety Lu was published, we already had a lot of momentum underway, with the development of Subpart J, and we just didn't feel like it was appropriate to stop that and to add pieces to it. So we decided to address it as a separate rulemaking, but couch it as a supplement to the policies that were developed under Subpart J. And the requirements in the final rule basically is that we establish some minimum requirements, and at the same time we provided quite a bit of guidance even within that rule itself to help with the implementation of those requirements. With this slide, you see a snapshot of some of the key elements that make up the rule. Okay. Obviously, added emphasis on the safety and work zone in the work zone policy. I've kind of covered that in some of the previous slides. And there's a specific section that addresses the use of positive protection devices, exposure control measures, which really addresses those strategies that would be used or could be used to avoid or minimize the exposure of the workers to traffic. Other traffic control measures, these are additional measures that could be used to heighten awareness or to improve guidance through work zones, to kind of, again, improve and make those work zones work better. Use of uniform law enforcement, which is one of the other traffic control measures, really, but we specifically added a section that covered this because the language in Safety Lu specifically identified this as a critical item. We also have one of the components is a safe entry and exit for work vehicles and equipment. Okay. And this was really added based on comments we received after we published the NPRM. Okay. Payment for traffic control features and operations to make sure that those devices that are needed, that are necessary, are appropriately addressed in terms of payment. Quality guidelines, finally, is the last piece of the key components that we'll be covering today. And it talks to the need for maintaining the quality of the work zone throughout the life of it. So many times we see the condition of some of the work zones that are out there, particularly ones that have been out there for a while, and the quality of the devices leads you or makes you question how visible they are, especially at night. So. More details will be covered for each one of these as I get into the meat of the presentation. First, work zone policy. The first shall that I'm going to cover. Okay, policy and related processes, procedures, and or guidance established under Subpart J shall include consideration of road user and safety, worker safety, by addressing the key issues. The first three: use of positive protection devices to prevent intrusions, exposure control measures to minimize exposure, other traffic control measures to minimize crashes. Again, some of the pieces that I touched on previously. But I wanted to make sure that it's understood that while we present those components, they're not presented in any or intended to be interpreted as being presented in any priority order. Okay, and they need to really be considered in combination along with project characteristics. When considering how best to address the work zone impacts. And the last item, safe entry and exit of work zone vehicles or work vehicles and equipment onto and from the travel lanes. That was, again, added based on comments that we received during the NPRM process. Okay. Now, This slide I added in there as a reminder that the rule itself and along with the guidance that's contained in it does not replace what's in the MUTCD or the AASHTO Roadside Design Guide. It's intended to be used in as a complement to those existing documents. Okay. Now the next shall that I'm going to cover, positive protection devices. The use shall be based on an engineering study, and an engineering study may be used to develop positive protection guidelines or to determine appropriate measures for individual projects. Okay. So we wanted to include this in there to assure that the decision on when to use a device is actually based on sound engineering judgment with full understanding of the applicability, design, implementation, and operation of the device. Okay. Because we wanted to make sure that there isn't any, I guess, avoid any indiscriminate use of device, because doing so could actually introduce more hazards than benefits. As an example, when we were developing the language for this rule, we actually invited a number of external stakeholders into a meeting. As part of that, kind of discuss some of the various situations that we ought to address with this rule. And one of the participants offered up the recommendation that all work zones ought to be, no matter the length or the duration, ought to be protected by barriers. And I guess what one example that she used to base the recommendation on was she often saw work zones that were in place, short-term work zones, and frequently those were tied to situations that she had concern about relating to site distance, meaning that the work zone was set up in place and there wasn't necessarily enough advance warning for drivers approaching it. And her suggested solution was, well, because of that, then we need to really put up barriers to protect that. And I guess the counter to that is, one, putting in the barriers themselves would require workers to be out there. It's not just a simple process. So the exposure that they would experience in putting the devices out and removing them also, introduces safety hazards. And certainly for site distance types of considerations, there are lots of other ways to give the motorists advance notice of what's coming, to change their behavior as they approach the work zone rather than just putting up barriers. Because if they hit it, their consequences too isn't minimal for a vehicle hitting barriers. There have been a number of documented cases of that resulting in fatalities. So again, just wanted to make the point that the use of positive protection devices should be based on an engineering study. Okay. And the engineering study should be based on the consideration of factors and characteristics such as these that we have included in the rule. And a lot of these you see, are really not anything new per se, and in the sense you'd almost consider them to some degree common sense type factors. Project scope and duration. Obviously, for a project that's going to be there for a longer period of time, it may make more sense to have a different type of strategy in protecting the workers than something that's only going to be there for an hour. Vehicle mix. If there are more trucks in the mix, there may be a more consideration for the consequences if an intrusion should occur. The type of work that we're dealing with. Does it require workers to be close to the traffic, to the high-speed traffic, or doesn't it? Distance between traffic and workers and the extent of worker exposure. Is a worker only going to be out there maybe for an hour, or are we talking about 10 workers being out there for several days? So all those are types of things that need to be part of the consideration Are there any escape paths for the workers if there's an intrusion, such as on the projects such as bridges and tunnels? There may not be, so there might be different types of an approach as you design those types of projects. And also, to kind of reinforce, you see one of the items, item 11 there, potential hazard to workers and road users presented by the device itself during device placement and removal should also be a part of the consideration. Positive protection devices, the use shall be considered where workers are at an increased risk from traffic and where positive protection devices offer the highest potential for increased safety for workers and road users. Basically, what we did here was we defined a number of characteristics or examples of conditions that may warrant the use of positive protection. And their examples are included in there not as specific criteria, rather they're intended as triggers for consideration of whether or not to use a positive protection device. And ultimately, the use should be determined by engineering study, as just previously discussed. Exposure control measures is another key aspect of what we introduced into this rule. Obviously, they should be considered to avoid or minimize exposure for workers and road users. So this is in addition to the positive protection devices and the strategies that help to avoid or minimize exposure should be considered during the design process. And the items here, again, none of these are really anything new. Full roll closures, which shorten the duration and improve quality, flexibility, and improve productivity in the work zones. Is one item that many states have started using. By the way, just to make sure that there isn't any confusion, these examples are put out here just to show some of the options that are available. They are not intended as specific ones that we are, and the only ones that we're advocating, again, as examples. Ramp closures, median crossovers, forward partial detours, again, all in the pretty common practice today. The last one, accelerated construction techniques. More and more, I think some of the agencies are recognizing the benefits from using prefab elements, so that a lot of the work is done outside of the stream of traffic, and it minimizes the time that work is required that really is involves exposure to the traffic. One of the examples that I saw really impressed with was some of the agencies using the bridge transport systems, where large segments of the bridge, or sometimes even the entire bridge pretty much, is almost built off-site and, in one night's operation, basically rolled into place. So, really going to great extents there to minimize the exposure. We also have other traffic control measures, as I mentioned previously. And these other traffic control measures should be considered to reduce work zone crashes and risks and consequences of intrusions into the workspace. As you can see, looking at the items on this list, none are really new here either, with the exception of maybe number 16, which is automated speed enforcement. And obviously, that would only be used where permitted by state and local laws. I know there are a number of states that are starting to look at the possibility of using this approach. I know that, but to my knowledge, I think only Illinois is actually has this in practice right now. Is using this, is actively using this right now. And the idea with these other traffic control measures is to encourage more routine consideration of safety needs and available measures during project development. And the key word there is routine consideration. Now, one of the other traffic control measures from the previous list is uniform law enforcement. And as I mentioned earlier, we decided to have a specific section to put specific emphasis on this area because Safety Lou did highlight this or emphasize this. Okay. Each agency, the requirements included in this rule requires that each agency, in partnership with the Federal Highway, shall develop a policy addressing the use of uniform law enforcement in federal aid highway projects. And the policy may consist of processes, procedures, and or guidance. The processes, procedures, and or guidance should address what you see there in terms of the items that are listed. Now, as far as developing a policy, a study that we did back in 2001 indicates that about 2/3 of the respondents who responded to that study or who participated in that study already had policies in place. So I think the impact of this rule is that many of those may merely need to just revisit their existing policies to see if any refinements may be necessary, given some of the additional recommendations that are part of the language. Okay. Now, the policy should address these items that are pointed out here, as I mentioned. Interaction between highway and law enforcement agency during project planning and development, particularly on the significant projects. I think this goes a long way in defining or looking at what some of the safety considerations might be early on, and so that appropriate design features such as pull-outs for the uniform law enforcement to stop traffic and write tickets and so forth could be included as part of that project. So this encourages early coordination to address those types of issues. Conditions where law enforcement involvement in work zone traffic control may be needed or beneficial, and criteria to determine the project's specific need for law enforcement. And the next slide that I'm going to have will include some suggestions on, some of those elements to consider as part of that. Then you see, let's see, general nature of law enforcement services to be provided and procedures to determine project-specific services as item 4. And, we're looking at, should it be presence, or is enforcement, a part of that picture, if you use the law enforcement. So those are the types of things that ought to be addressed as part of the consideration for use. Item 5, appropriate work zone safety and mobility training for officers consistent with subpart J. That is so that the officers understand the specific work zone hazards, I guess, that they may be, that to be cognizant of and know how to deal with, and some of the considerations that are involved in how they approach their involvement in the work zones. Procedures for interagency and project-level communications between highway agency and law enforcement personnel. This one was included in there specifically from feedback from a participant when we had that external group looking at it and providing advice. There was a person or representative from the International Association of Chiefs of Police who thought that, a lot of cases, some of the police officers who go on site really are a little bit divorced from the project, so to speak. And they, I guess he even used the term DVD time, I guess, that with some of the enforcement personnel is how they kind of approach it. So we want to make sure that, if you have a law enforcement officer, that there's appropriate communications between the project personnel and the officer when he comes on, so that he's a little bit more aware of some of the concerns that the project personnel have noticed, or some of the specific things that they think could, that the officer could pay more attention to improve the situation. Okay, as I mentioned, this slide, we cover some of the specific conditions that may suggest the need for the use of uniform law enforcement. Again, a lot of it is, you won't see, as anything new here. A lot of it is common sense. Frequent worker presence adjacent to high-speed traffic without positive protection devices. Right? So that's pretty much self-explanatory there. And a lot of these other ones are too. Complex or very short-term changes in traffic patterns with significant potential for road user confusion or worker risk from traffic exposure. Another one here, work zone operations that require brief stoppage of all traffic in one or both directions. Again, nothing rocket science here. A lot of it is kind of common sense. And again, though, I think these are some of the things that should be discussed in terms of that collaboration between the state DOTs and the law enforcement community as to what some of the expectations are and some of the concerns that the law enforcement could address. And these are some of the factors that help both kind of understand maybe a little bit better what their roles are with respect to making the work zone work better. Okay, work vehicles and equipment. I want to maybe talk a little bit more about this from the standpoint of a little bit of confusion that the language in the rule created with this item. Earlier, in one of my earlier slides, I mentioned that as part of the policy that enhancements to it is that it shall address the work vehicles and equipment entry and exit. And then this language here, which is also excerpted from the rule, seems to suggest that this is a should condition rather than a shall, as earlier mentioned. And really, the should is there to address how it is addressed. Should be based on individual project characteristics and factors. So there's a requirement for this aspect to be addressed as part of the policy, but that how it's addressed should be based on individual project characteristics and factors. So that's the difference between the shall and the should. Okay. And again, this was included in recognition that there are many work zone fatalities involving workers that result from being struck by work vehicles and equipment. And in fact, as we developed this rule, the worker safety advocates actually pushed us for additional requirements that even go further to address developing internal traffic control plans. But after a lot of discussions and reflecting on that, we felt that the work zone or the workplace safety requirements, which really is what that relates to, are outside the scope of this rulemaking and really fall under the purview of OSHA. Okay. Next item is payment. Okay. And the key item here, I guess, is that payment for traffic control features and operations shall not be incidental to the contract or included in payment for other items of work not related to traffic control and safety. In doing some research and as far as when we came up with this language, I found a report that dates back to 1957, which kind of highlighted a problem that was being experienced even back then. And the observation was that traffic control needs were not given extensive thought during PS&E, and the contractor was asked to absorb unnecessary costs let me rephrase that. The traffic control needs were not given extensive thought during PS&E, and the contractor were asked to absorb necessary costs in other bid items. Okay, so this was as far as making it incidental to other items. That's a problem that it even existed back then. So, in addressing this, this is why we made that a shall condition here, and the logic is that the PS&E should provide sufficient details such that quantity and type of devices and the overall effort that's required to implement and maintain the TMP can be determined as part of that document, and that the necessary features that are identified as part of that document are provided with appropriate pay provisions to make sure that they become part of the project. Separate pay items shall be provided for major categories of traffic control devices, safety features, and work zone activities. Now, this doesn't mean that separate pay items does not mean a unit pay. It could be either unit pay or lump sum. Okay. For method-based specs, unit prices or unit price pay items, lump sum pay items, or a combination thereof may be used. Now, this basically just reiterates what was already included in the previously in subpart J. Okay. And finally, the specs should include provisions to require and enforce compliance with implementation and maintenance of the project transportation management plan and the related traffic control items. So, with the specific requirements in place, I think this would go a long way in helping make sure that the key items that are identified as necessary are appropriately paid for and accounted for as part of the project planning, and then ultimately becomes part of the project. Quality guidelines. Finally, this is the last item of the ones that I highlighted in one of my earlier slides. Each agency shall develop and implement quality guidelines to help maintain the quality and adequacy of the temporary traffic control devices for the duration of the project, and a level of inspection necessary to provide ongoing compliance with the quality guidelines shall be provided. So there are two shalls here. Existing guidelines such as those developed by ATSA, which basically includes a visual guide of devices that are considered good, acceptable, or ones that needs to be replaced, is provided with some visual cues. Though that may be adopted, or I think some states also have similar guidelines that they've developed may also be used. So it doesn't lock you into any specific set, but it does require that guidelines be developed and be enforced. Okay. So in summary, just to recap, the new rule provides for supplementing the work zone processes and procedures developed under subpart J to specifically address appropriate consideration of positive protection devices, exposure control measures, and other traffic control measures in order to help reduce work zone fatalities and injuries. A policy addressing the use of uniform law enforcement on federal aid projects is required. Specific provisions are included that address appropriate payment and quality assurance for necessary safety features. Quality guidelines need to be implemented along with appropriate level of inspection. And with the implementation of this rule, what we expect to see is an increased consideration and management of worker and motorist safety in work zones, more strategic and effective use of uniform law enforcement in work zones, more clarity and better provisions for safety features needed on projects, better quality devices, throughout the life of a project, and ultimately, all these should lead to safer work zones. Okay. Resources. To help with implementation, there are a number of resources that are available, including some of the documents that we've posted on our website, which includes the original NPRM itself. The preamble to it will provide some additional depth of information and discussion on some of the things that were considered, as well as the final rule. Questions and answers document is also posted, and this is really a more dynamic document. As we continue to get questions related to this rule, and we will continue to modify and enhance that document as appropriate. And this can be found at the link provided. We also have a workzone peer-to-peer program that we launched last year, which can be used to help with implementation of this rule. The program really was established to support the state and the local transportation agencies and by providing them with a convenient access to experienced peers who can help them, or share some of their experiences and lessons learned on the specific work zone related types of problems or issues. And by the way, this program is free. Additional resources. As part of the Work Zone Safety Grant, there are a number of products that obviously are potentially useful for this, including the multitude of training and guidelines that are being developed. But a few that I specifically pointed out here relate to some of the specific requirements that are included as part of this rule. One of them is the Work Zone Positive Protection Toolbox, which should be available anytime now. I think the final product had been approved and it's going through publication is where I believe the stage is. Cards for shadow vehicle placement to provide additional guidance and ready guidance out there for those in the field. Decision tool for when to use positive protection that is getting close to being finalized with a target date of November 2008. Work zone safety audits. That's a similar or a branch of the road safety audits that people may be more familiar with. But the idea is to have some mechanism, too, similar to the road safety audits, but looking specifically at work zones to help identify some of the things that opportunities for improvement, for enhancing the safety aspects of a specific work zone. And finally, can't forget to mention the National Work Zone Safety Information Clearinghouse, where you'll probably find a lot of these materials as they become available, in addition to others, including examples of policies and procedures that other states may develop over time. Okay. One thing that I didn't mention that or include in the slide that I thought would be worthwhile mentioning is that there are also a couple of NCHRP studies that maybe have significant relevance here. One is the 3-80 Traffic Enforcement Strategies for Work Zones. I know that the Phase 1 report is already published and available, but there was a next stage one that is still under development and may be available in the near future. Also, 3-69, Design and Construction Work Zones in High-Speed Highways. There may also be some specifics in there that could help as you start implementing this rule. Additional resources. We also have a workshop that's under development that's focused on helping those agencies that may not have a policy in place on use of law enforcement in work zones, to help them kind of walk through the process for developing it, and perhaps even at the end of the work zone to have a draft that may be available. This workshop is still under development currently, but should be online in the near future. And as far as other contacts, the Federal Highway Administration, for those states that find themselves needing technical assistance as they implement this rule, don't forget that the division officers are in place to help with that, to provide support with that. And where needed, additional support from headquarters and resource center could also be available through the division office. And I kind of put my name down, and I'm from headquarters, and Ken Wood is from our resource center. So, but included our names in this contacts. But really, the first contact you should make if you need assistance is through our division offices. Okay. With that, are there any questions?
All right, this is Brad Sent coming on. If you would look, all the people who are out here visiting us through the Media Site Center, if you'll look on your screen, on the upper left-hand side, you'll see the word Media Site, and under that is a little box that says Ask. If you click on that box, you'll be able to submit a question. A couple of you have already done that already, and so I have a couple of questions for you right off the bat, Chung. First one is, can we make this presentation available for download through the clearinghouse? Is your presentation something we can make available?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll put a notice on the home page of the clearinghouse today about how to get hold and download the presentation.
Okay. You can even add the frequently asked questions for convenience. It's available from our website, but if you're posting this, why not just add that as well?
Terrific. Okay, our first question comes in from Richard Creed at the Florida Department of Transportation. His question asks, would an engineering study be project-specific, and what would this study include other than what is done as part of the current TCP design process?
Well, the engineering study, there's a definition included as part of in the MUTCD on what it ought to include. Let me see if I printed out. I thought I printed out a. I'll quote what the is in the MUTCD: the comprehensive analysis and evaluation of available pertinent information and the application of appropriate principles, standards, guidance, and practices as contained in the manual and other sources for the purpose of deciding upon the applicability, design, operation, or installation of a traffic control device. Engineering studies shall be performed by an engineer or by an individual working under the supervision of an engineer through the application of procedures and criteria established by the engineer. Engineering studies shall be documented. So, I guess in answer to your question, if those are if that's part of the process that you normally follow currently, and the addition of some of these items in there in terms of the additional safety considerations, if they're not already addressed, I think would be perfectly appropriate to make as part of that same exercise. And one other clarification on that too is that the intent is that it's not necessarily required that a separate engineering study be done for every project. There are also some of the groups of projects that may have similar characteristics. You could use an engineering study to develop the agency policies or procedures that address that, and potentially that could be applied to groups of projects.
Very good. Another question comes in. Who oversees the implementation of this program? Who has oversight over it, and how is that done?
Well, similar to the implementation of Subpart J, Subpart K, we anticipate that the state would be working closely with our division offices to make sure that the requirements are fulfilled.
Very good. Next question. This kind of gets back, this is one that I can answer, as part of, some people have asked whether this is available only as a transcript or as the PowerPoint presentation. This entire program is being recorded and will be available on the Work Zone Clearinghouse today as early as 3 o'clock. So this will be available in its entirety as you've seen it live today at 3 o'clock. Next question. Is it a requirement to have law enforcement as a pay item? Is that a mandatory thing, I guess?
Well, let me answer that question in two different ways. With this, we require the development of a policy on the use of law enforcement. We are not necessarily absolutely requiring that law enforcement actually be used. There may be some locations or some states where, for whatever reasons that the use of law enforcement is not part of the picture, and and they may determine that it would be inappropriate to continue to add that as an additional feature. We require that, and the policy could address it in that way, based on how they've arrived at that conclusion. Okay. Now, when it is used, I'm sorry, I kind of lost track of the original question now. Can you repeat the original question?
The original question is if it is a requirement to have law enforcement as a pay item.
Yes. If law enforcement ultimately is used, then there should be an appropriate pay item for it.
Okay, very good. Next question that's come in. If a local city government chooses to follow these federal guidelines for law enforcement, will they be eligible to receive federal funds?
I don't think that the determination really is, if you're currently eligible for federal aid funds and you're implementing projects using federal aid funds, then these are the criteria that would apply. So this does not have any bearing on changing that formula of who would receive federal aid funds.
Very good. Next question. Is this rule addressed in the new NPA to the MUTCD? And we know that this NPA is not yet effective, but will this rule become effective later this year? How does this all play in with what's going on with the MUTCD and the notice of proposed amendments to it?
There are certain aspects of this that may be appropriate, as part of that update. And Ken Wood, who I mentioned as a contact earlier, he is deeply involved in that NPA process, and he also is very familiar with what the specific requirements are that's included under this. So, as part of that process, for those pieces, I think for those portions that's appropriate to include, will ultimately be included.
Very good. Next question. Will the National Highway Institute develop or modify any of its existing work zone traffic control training courses specifically for law enforcement?
Right now, there is law enforcement training that's available out there now, and in fact, we were part of the process, I guess, when in developing that training material. And I certainly could see some of the existing training that's under NHI potentially maybe including some, drawing some additional material from that training course into it, where appropriate. But I don't necessarily see a separate NHI course coming out, to specifically address uniform law enforcement and work zones, because we feel like, that's already addressed with existing courses that are available.
Okay. Our next question deals with rolling work zones or temporary work zones. And the question is, when replacing signal lights at intersections less than 15 minutes per site, are there any guidelines for traffic control signs? That seems to be more of an MUTCD type question, but.
I don't think I'm probably in the best position to really provide an answer on that, because I don't know what the specific characteristics, of that site would be. But, I think if there's some, as Brad mentioned, if there's some questions that relate more to the MUTCD, there's the MUTCD peer-to-peer that could be where the question could be addressed to.
Good. I think we probably have time for one more question. One right now seems very germane to our discussion. If a state is using their 402 funds for law enforcement in work zones, do they now have to use project funds instead of 402 funds?
No, this doesn't, dictate the specific source of funds that you'll be using. I think, it's just in terms of addressing the eligibility of it, that federal aid funds can be used for this. But, but if there are other sources that are part of the picture, this does not change that.
Very good. Any concluding comments for us today, Chung?
Well, I understand that there was a very large sign up for this. So, so I'm glad that there's this level of interest. Again, for those who this affects and who, maybe have not gotten very far down the path of implementing it, I suggest that, you start working on that now. And I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in this. And hopefully you found that of use in helping you understand what the requirements are.
Well, on behalf of the Clearinghouse, Chung, thank you very much for participating. Just by way of information, about 573 people signed on to the webinar. And just as a reminder, it is available after 3 o'clock, again, live for people. Of course, we won't be able to take questions in those archive sessions. But if we receive sufficient interest, please feel free to send us information. I'm sure Chung will be able to answer questions. And we've even discussed with Chung, if there continues to be a lot of questions that we're not able to address live in this webinar, we'll set up a conference call in the future perhaps to address questions that people have as a result of this new rule. So thank you very much, Chung. We appreciate you being here. And thank you to all of you for joining us in the Work Zone Safety Information Clearinghouse for this webinar. Thank you.